It's January the 18th, 2022, and our reading today in the book of 2 Chronicles is in chapter 23. In the 7th year, Jehoiada showed his strength. He made a covenant with the commanders of units of 100, Azariah, son of Jeroham, Ishmael, son of Jehohanan, Azariah, son of Obed, Mosiah, son of Adaiah, and Elishaphat, son of Zikri. They went throughout Judah and gathered the Levites and the heads of Israelite families from all the towns. When they came to Jerusalem, the whole assembly made a covenant with the king at the temple of God. Jehoiada said to them, "The king's son shall reign, as the Lord promised concerning the descendants of David. Now this is what you are to do. A third of you priests and Levites who are going on duty on the Sabbath are to keep watch at the doors. A third of you at the royal palace, and a third at the foundation gate, and all the other men are to be in the courtyards of the temple of the Lord. No one is to enter the temple of the Lord except the priests and Levites on duty. They may enter because they are consecrated, but all the other men are to guard what the Lord has assigned to them. The Levites are to station themselves round the king, each man with his weapons in his hand. Anyone who enters the temple must be put to death. Stay close to the king wherever he goes." The Levites and all the men of Judah did just as Jehoiada the priest ordered. Each one took his men, those who were going on duty on the Sabbath and those who were going off duty, for Jehoiada the priest had not released any of the divisions. Then he gave the commanders of units of 100 the spears and the large and small shields that had belonged to King David and that were in the temple of God. He stationed all the men, each with his weapon in his hand, round the king, near the altar and the temple, from the south side to the north side of the temple. Jehoiada and his sons brought out the king's son and put the crown on him. They presented him with a copy of the covenant and proclaimed him king. They anointed him and shouted, "Long live the king." When Athaliah heard the noise of the people running and cheering the king, she went to them at the temple of the Lord. She looked, and there was the king standing by his pillar at the entrance. The officers and the trumpeters were beside the king, and all the people of the land were rejoicing and blowing trumpets, and singers with musical instruments were leading the praises. Then Athaliah tore her robes and shouted, "Treason, treason!" Jehoiada the priest sent out the commanders of units of 100 who were in charge of the troops and said to them, "Bring her out between the ranks and put to the sword anyone who follows her." For the priest had said, "Do not put her to death at the temple of the Lord." So they seized her as she reached the entrance of the horse gate on the palace grounds, and there they put her to death. Jehoiada then made a covenant that he and the people and the king would be the Lord's people. All the people went to the temple of Baal and tore it down. They smashed the altars and idols and killed Mattan, the priest of Baal, in front of the altars. Then Jehoiada placed the oversight of the temple of the Lord in the hands of the priests who were Levites, to whom David had made assignments in the temple to present the burnt offerings of the Lord as written in the law of Moses, with rejoicing and singing, as David had ordered. He also stationed doorkeepers at the gates of the Lord's temple, so that no one who was in any way unclean might enter. He took with him the commanders of hundreds, the nobles, the rulers of the people, and all the people of the land, and brought the king down from the temple of the Lord. They went into the palace through the upper gate and seated the king on the royal throne, and all the people of the land rejoiced. And the city was quiet, because Athaliah had been slain with the sword. Amen. Well, I'm sure you noticed as we read there today that the word covenant occurs in this chapter 4 times. Now, mostly, of course, when we use that word, or when the Bible uses that word, it's used as it is used mostly back in chapter 21 and verse 7. Remember this? Nevertheless, because of the covenant the Lord had made with David, the Lord was not willing to destroy the house of David. He'd promised to maintain a lamp for him and his descendants forever. That's mostly how we understand the old covenant, the new covenant. It's God's special arrangement, his commitment, the promises that he makes for his people. But exactly because of that covenant, now these people, in this moment of great crisis, they are led by a good man. I mean, again, he's one of these forgotten heroes, I think, of the Bible, of the Old Testament. Who's ever heard of Jehoiada? His amazing wife, Jehoshaphat, we touched on yesterday. But now, really, at a human level, this man is the hero of this chapter. Of course, God is the hero of the whole story and is working with and through this man. But at a human level, he's a bit of a hero here as he leads the people in covenant. Verse 1, he made a covenant with the commanders of units of 100. In other words, he enters into a solemn agreement and arrangement. And in the first instance, all the details which he spells out are to protect and to serve the boy King Joash. He's only 7 years of age at this stage. So they make a covenant between themselves, Jehoiada and the leaders. Then the people make a covenant with God. Verse 16, Jehoiada then made a covenant that he and the people and the king would be the Lord's people. So this isn't just some practical political arrangement. You could argue that about the first covenant. This is now deeply spiritual. They are covenanting themselves, devoting themselves, giving themselves to be the Lord's people. And that's not just fancy words or a religious experience. It's very practical. Verse 17, they remove, they destroy all the remnants of the pagan religion which had been there entrenched in Jerusalem and in the country because of the evil influence of Athaliah. So they get rid of all of that. And of course, they have to get rid of her, which they do. Verse 15. So they seized her as she reached the entrance of the horse gate on the palace grounds, and there they put her to death. She's a grisly character in terms of what she did, her influence, and now her end. But in doing this, in making this covenant with the Lord and working it out in practice, where do we get to by the end of the chapter? Verse 21, there is joy. The land rejoiced, and there is peace. The city was quiet. Those are the benefits and blessings of being in covenant relationship. Such covenant relationships with God, he's made his covenant with us. We, in a sense, are in a covenant with him and with other true believers. Such covenant relationships are at the heart of Christian fellowship and what it means to be a member of Christ's church. And if we are faithful in the keeping and the honoring of these covenant relationships, as we've seen in this chapter, there are great blessings. We too will enjoy something of joy and peace in our hearts, in our homes, and in the fellowship that we are part of. Perhaps in the New Covenant, the New Testament, Um, we could think of this covenant relationship in terms, especially, of the one another commands that we're given. This is how we walk with one another in covenant, loving, serving, helping, blessing one another. There are 50 of these. Let me give you a little flavor from Galatians chapter 6. Brothers, if someone is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should restore him gently. But watch yourself, or you also may be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks he's something when he's nothing, he deceives himself. Each one should test his own actions. Then he can take pride in himself without comparing himself to somebody else. For each one should carry his own load. Anyone who receives instruction in the word must share all good things with his instructor. Carry each other's burdens. Restore one another gently. This is what's involved in covenant relationships.